What if he wasn't? What if he failed? Because he might. In fact, the odds were high that he would. Disrespect for non-humans might not be official policy, but it nonetheless quietly pervaded the Navy. Thrawn would have to try twice as hard as anyone else, and succeed twice as often just to stay even with them. And when Thrawn went down, it was almost guaranteed that anyone associated with him would go down too. Ensign Vanto, Thrawn prompted. Shall I speak with the Commandant? No point, Eli said, shutting down the datapad and putting it away. The Navy doesn't change orders just because junior officers don't like them. When you're an admiral, we'll see what you can do. I understand, Thrawn said quietly. Very well. I shall strive to achieve that rank as quickly as possible. Eli looked sharply at him. Was the damn Chiss mocking him? But there was no hint of amusement in his face. Thrawn was deadly serious. A shiver ran up Eli's back. The ghosts of the old stories whispering through his mind. Chiss didn't make idle boasts or promises. And once they set their minds to something, they succeeded or died in the attempt. Maybe he really thought he could make admiral someday. Maybe he was right. I'll look forward to it, Eli said. Come on. The order's said to be on the Corellia transport at 1800 hours. We don't want to start our careers by missing our ride. Chapter 7. There is satisfaction in defeating an enemy, but one must never allow oneself to become complacent. There are always more enemies to be identified, faced, and vanquished. All warriors understand the need to face and defeat the enemy. Both aspects of the task can be challenging. Both can require thought, insight, and planning. Failures in any of those areas can cost unnecessary time and irreplaceable lives. But a warrior may forget that even the task of identifying the enemy can be difficult, and the cost of that failure can lead to catastrophe. Eli had occasionally warned Thrawn of the presence of politics within the Navy. They'd certainly seen evidence of that influence during the Orbar incident. Now, once again, politics had arisen that could directly affect them. I wasn't able to get anything on why Captain Virgilio was replaced, Eli murmured as they followed the procession of officers escorting the new commander, Captain Philia Rossi, on her tour of the Blood Crow. But everyone agrees that Rossi's very well connected. Nowadays, that's all you need to get a command. I see, Thrawn said. Eli grimaced. I see. That was Thrawn's go-to answer when he didn't want to say anything else. There was certainly plenty that he could say, starting with the kind of Captain Rick Virgilio had been. He'd been excellent at his job, walking the necessary balance between standing orders and flexibility. In the 18 months Eli and Thrawn had served under him, the captain had built up a fine reputation for trapping smugglers, rendering aid to distressed vessels, and diffusing potentially damaging political situations on mid-rim and outer-rim worlds. He'd earned the respect of his officers and crew, and highly satisfactory reviews from the governors and other political leaders with whom he'd interacted. Equally important, certainly from Eli's and Thrawn's point of view, Virgilio had taken in stride the presence of an alien officer on his ship. There had been a degree of tension during the first few weeks as Virgilio tested the limits of Thrawn's intelligence, knowledge, and ability. But once the captain learned his new officer's parameters, Eli could detect no difference in the captain's treatment or acceptance of his second weapons officer. When the position of first weapons officer opened up, he'd raised no objections to Thrawn being promoted to that position. In fact, ship's gossip had suggested that Virgilio might have actually recommended the Chiss for the job. Now, without warning or explanation, Virgilio had been removed from the Blood Crow, and a younger, less experienced captain brought in. There was little that Eli had been able to learn about the new captain. Philia Rossi had graduated from the Wraithall Academy 12 years earlier, and had spent most of her time since then on Socorro, first on the ground, then aboard an orbiting defense platform out in the system's asteroid belts. For the past year, she'd been first officer aboard an ore freighter escort. Now, suddenly, she'd been promoted to command of a cruiser. It seemed obvious that the decision had been based on politics and influence rather than merit or even seniority. Still, Eli was willing to give Rossi the benefit of the doubt. It was possible that the driving force was less political status than the simple result of personnel transfers. If Captain Virgilio had been promoted to a better, more prestigious command, then someone else had to be brought to the Blood Crow to take his place. But if that was the case, news of Virgilio's promotion had not been passed to the Blood Crow's other officers. Such silence from the high command lent additional weight to Eli's suspicions that the former captain had been retired or even quietly dismissed. Still, there must necessarily be a first command in every officer's career, Thrawn said into Eli's thoughts. I suppose, Eli conceded. I just don't see why her first command has to be on our ship. Ahead, the captain and the short line of officers trailing behind her had reached the number 2 storage bay. The captain hit the hatch release and stepped inside. First Officer Nels Dayland close behind her. Eli winced. Uh-oh, he murmured. The rest of the officers knew what it meant, too. They began drifting to both sides of the passageway, making room for Thrawn to pass when the expected call came. The wait was barely 10 seconds. Thrawn! The captain's voice boomed from inside the storage bay. Get in here, now! Captain Rossi and Senior Lieutenant Dalen stood at one side of the storage bay. Rossi's facial glow is increasing. Her eyes narrowed in a frown. Dalen stands motionless, his face showing a partially masked expression of discomfort. Senior Lieutenant Dalen tells me this is yours, Rossi said, pointing at the equipment stacked along the bulkhead. It is, Captain. You mind telling me what the hell it's doing taking up space on my ship? He found it in a scrap market. We were investigating smuggler activity, Dalen put in. As I mentioned earlier, Your name, Lieutenant Thrawn! Rossi cut him off. Her facial glow increases. Her stance is stiff, her fingers moving slightly. No, ma'am. Then shut it! I asked you a question, Lieutenant. As Senior Lieutenant Dalen said, the parts are in a scrap market, Thrawn said. They are antiques, remnants of the Clone War. I know what they are, Rossi growled, looking at the piles again. Droidica, buzz droid, 2 buzz droids, half a step. Her eyes narrowed. Is that part of a hyperdrive ring? Yes, ma'am. These aren't antiques, Lieutenant. Rossi snorts, her lips curling down briefly. These are junk. Perhaps, ma'am, Thrawn said. However, as I am not fully familiar with the technology of that era, I hope to gain insight by studying them. And maybe get them working again? Rossi asked. Don't deny it. I can see fill-ins on both buzz droids. Brand new components. She raises her eyebrows. Her finger movements intensify briefly. They'd better not be components from the Bloodcrow stores. No, ma'am, Thrawn said. They were purchased elsewhere. At his own expense, Dalen murmured. Senior Lieutenant Dalen is correct, Thrawn said. The buzz droids in particular struck me as potentially useful. They are compact, with specialized drilling and cutting tools that allow them to... Spare me the lecture! Rossi cut him off. Her hand makes an abbreviated slash through the air. The pitch of her voice lowers. You may have read about the Clone Wars, but some of us lived it. And Virgilio just let you bring this stuff aboard? Captain Virgilio permitted me to purchase them. Yes, ma'am, Thrawn said. He also gave me permission to store them here when I was not working on them. Very generous of him, Rossi said. It may have caught your attention that Virgilio isn't captain anymore. I am, and I run a clean ship. I want this garbage dumped before your next watch. Clear? Beside her, Dalen stirred. His stance indicates disagreement. Ma'am, if I might suggest... I asked if that was clear, Lieutenant. Yes, Captain, Thrawn said. May I offer an alternative? If I didn't want to hear from my first officer, what makes you think I want to hear from you? Rossi countered. Senior Lieutenant Dalen, you'll see that he dumps it as ordered. We're done here. Yes, ma'am. Dalen remained standing where he is, making no indication of preparing to leave the bay.